Alright, in this lesson we're going to begin the process of rendering out our cloud bank. Okay, so if I were to come in and take the particle simulation that we left off with in our previous lesson, you can see that we are just still rendering with the default Phong material. So I'll start by coming in, selecting this point cloud. Let's go to either the Model, Animate, or Render menus. Let's go to Get Material, and we'll assign something like a constant. In this particular example, I'm not going to start off by using the ice particle volume because I actually want to create sort of my own particle shaper results, which a particle shaper node is automatically created with this one. So I'll just kind of go in and create this by hand. So we'll start with a constant just so we can assign something different to this object. Let's press 7 on the keyboard to open up the render tree. All right, I'm going to go into the particle section, and let's start with the particle renderer. So we'll take this, connect this into the volume, and let's see what we get. Okay, so you can see we have the volume that's being rendered out, but you can see to begin with it kind of starts off as this yellowish color, which is completely normal. So all we have to do is go into the particle renderer. Let's take a look inside the particle color to begin with. So if we were to take a quick region, let's first turn on override particle color, which will give these particles sort of a pink color. And let's just set this color to white, so that way these particles sort of render out with this white color. Right, now when it comes to actually rendering this with any kind of ambience or diffuse, a lot of times I find that it's really not necessary to start off with a high level of ambience. So typically I'll begin by bringing this value all the way down to 0 and bringing the diffuse all the way up to 1, or at least some kind of a higher value. And then if I need to at some point in time, I can always come in and add any ambience, but just as a matter of personal preference, I kind of like to start with this. Okay, now let's start by just kind of setting up our basic light source, because as I mentioned in some of our earlier lessons, it's really important that we get a decent idea of how the lighting is affecting these objects or these volumes before we start to get too far into the manipulation of that volume material. So I'll start by just selecting my default light, press H on my keyboard to unhide it here in the viewport. I'll switch to my rotate tool. And what I want to try to do is kind of get this to where it kind of looks like these clouds are being sort of lit from behind. So I'll try to get this light sort of shining from back behind here. There we go. And with this light selected, I'll press Enter on my keyboard, turn on shadows, take a quick render. Let's see what we have. Okay, so looks like we could probably stand to bring these shadows down a little bit. We actually are getting some decent illumination on the back side of this cloud, and the reason is because these shadows have by default a pretty high umbra setting, which allows these shadows to have a little bit of kind of opacity to them. Now if we were to bring this umbra all the way down to 0, you can see we get these really intense dark shadows. And in my case, that's not quite what I'm looking for. So let's maybe start with a number of 0.5 or 0.6. So you can see that we get a relatively decent amount of illumination on the back side of this cloud, and it really just sort of saves us the trouble of having to use any kind of additional fill lights for this particular scene. Now, right now I feel like my illumination's a little bit too weak, so I'm going to just begin by taking this intensity and starting to bring this up. So as we start to render this out, see we have kind of these backlit clouds with just a little bit of shadow detail on the underside. Alright, now I might go ahead and create sort of a sky type background to this, because right now it is just sort of rendering out black. So quick and easy way to do this, we can drop in just something like a polygon sphere, and take this and scale it out until it encompasses pretty much everything in the scene. Let's go to Model, Get Material, and again we'll give this something like a constant material. I find this is a pretty good material to use for things like sky or any kind of a background where we don't really need there to be any sort of highlight or shadow detail, just a nice flat color. Now what we'll probably see whenever we render this is a very different result now. You can see these clouds have really started to change color. And the reason for that is that by default, this sphere is actually blocking out any shadows that are coming from this light, from this infinite light. So let's select the sphere, go into the Selection Explorer, and take a look inside the visibility. So over in the Rendering tab, let's go into the Shadow and tell it not to cast or receive any shadows. So that way any shadows should now pass right through the sphere. And there we go. That's much better. Alright, so we're off to a relatively decent start with this cloud bank. So what we'll start to do in our next lesson is begin the process of coming in and now beginning to actually build out some different fractals and starting to combine a few different textures so that we can actually start to control the density and get a lot more control over the overall shape of this cloud bank. So we'll continue this process in our next lesson.